His health director is not ruling out stricter measures, including more lockdowns. A Texas cop has been killed in the line of duty. Sergeant Josh Bartlett of the Lubbock County SWAT team shot and killed investigating the reports of a man with a gun.
It's tough for me to put in a lot of words with regard to that loss, for the fact that we will be mourning with his family and his family throughout the Lubbock County Sheriff's Office and all of law enforcement.
Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rose says 4 other officers were wounded. The suspect had been barricaded in a home. It's now reported he's been captured. America is listening to Fox News.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Bank Pacific. Happy 67th anniversary. Viva Bank Pacific!
Bank Pacific, serving our Pacific communities for 67 years. Where others put branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Now, by going to Fox News Podcast.
New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo facing questioning this weekend over social misconduct allegations against him.
2 investigators are expected to interview the governor in Albany. Several women have accused Governor Cuomo of unwanted advances, at times socially, in other instances privately. The governor has denied any intentional harassment after first apologizing for making anyone feel uncomfortable. Many New York state politicians in both parties have asked him to resign. Cuomo has refused, saying the investigation should play out. While Governor Cuomo faces other controversies, including one on nursing home death numbers during COVID, some feel this questioning means the harassment probe is near an end. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
Recovery efforts at the condo building collapse in Surfside, Florida may be coming to an end soon. Crews have removed more than 26 million pounds of debris. 97 people are known dead. A handful remain unaccounted for. We should know by next week the fate of infrastructure bills in the Senate.
President Biden is rejecting the naysayers of his infrastructure proposal.
I don't think it's dead. I think it's still alive. I still have confidence we're going to be able to get what I proposed.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has set up a critical procedural vote next week on a $1.2 trillion bipartisan framework for roads, bridges, and high-speed internet, and says Democrats have until next Wednesday to agree to move forward with a $3.5 trillion budget resolution that sets spending for education, health care, family leave, and climate initiatives. That larger package could be approved without Republican support. At the White House, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
Pfizer has agreed to pay $345 million to resolve claims by consumers they overpaid for EpiPens because of anti-competitive and unfair practices by the drug maker and the company that marketed the treatments. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tuman for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tuman, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
A 1 and a 2 and a you know what to do.
We're happy to celebrate 77 years. Thank you, Uncle Samuel, the reason we're here. Happy Liberation Day, Guahan. Bank Pacific's here for you. Viva Liberation! Viva!
Viva Bank Pacific!
Viva!
Viva Guahan!
Viva!
Member FDIC.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Right, Jose?
Absolutely, Bob.
Yeah, even on Friday. And, of course, it is Friday. It's the last day of the week. The end of Tall Tales for this week. It's going to be tough on Jose and I, 2 whole days without Tall Tales. But we'll soldier through. We'll make it. We'll be back on Monday afternoon. So let's enjoy this last day of Tall Tales for this week. Why not start out with Zemi Ikotny? And we start out with the Daily News today, which wants to talk about what they think is the RISE Act. And, of course, it's not the RISE Act. A little accuracy goes a long way, Daily News. Here's the headline of the editorial. Our view, $30 million may not be enough to cover all RISE Act payments. Everyone who calls Guam home was hit hard financially by the Wuhan virus pandemic, especially those in lower income brackets. Most people couldn't work for months. They struggled to put food on the table and cover other expenses. The federal government helped by dispersing food items throughout the pandemic, and 3 federal stimulus packages that provided needed cash were of huge benefit. Lawmakers in December passed the RISE Act, thinking there'd be no more federal aid coming. But President Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan provided $1,400 stimulus checks to individuals and hundreds of millions of dollars more for other services and for GovGuam's use. The RISE Act provides $800 pandemic stimulus payments to individual tax filers who earn less than $40,000. Joint filers will receive $1,600 if they earn less than $800. Well, I guess today is my day just to be picky. This is what the editorial says. Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan provided $1,400 stimulus checks to individuals. Those are not stimulus checks. Those are ex gratia transfer payments. They're a form of welfare. You don't stimulate the economy by setting up something that has a means test. The RISE Act, the RISE Act is a dead letter, and I'll get into that after I go into the editorial a little farther. The RISE Act provides $800 pandemic, once again, stimulus payments. I think that was the last thing that raging Bisco Lee had on her mind when she introduced her RISE Act back in the 35th Guam legislature. $800 payments to individual tax filers who earn less than $40,000. Joint filers would receive $1,600 if they earn less than $80,000. But the law only provides $30 million for the payments. Now, going back to the RISE Act, The RISE Act set up the brackets that I just mentioned. You have to be someone who earned less than 40 grand, 800 for a single filer, 1,600 for joint filers. And the funding for the RISE Act was to come from the federal mana that flows in from our national government, according to that bill. But if there wasn't any or there wasn't enough, then $30 million was appropriated from local funds, which means, yeah. Jose's looking at me rather askance. Yeah, $30 million that we don't have.
Or they're giving back to us.
Yeah, or they're giving back to us. Editorial says, but the law only provides $30 million for the payments. Now, you got to remember, this is that act that provided only $30 million for the payment. On Wednesday, Rev Tax Director Daphne Shimizu said it's not clear if $30 million is enough to pay all Guam residents eligible for the RISE Act. Well, it's not who's eligible for the RISE Act, it's who's eligible for the governor's program called the All Rise Program. Not the RISE Act, but the All Rise Program, which she created herself. Here's a quote. Basically, as long as you meet the income requirements, the residence requirements, and have all the proper documents required for the program, you should be able to qualify, Shimizu said. RevTax will issue the payments on a first-come, first-served basis until the money runs out. What do senators plan to do for those who qualify after the funds run out? If they intend to pay eligible recipients equitably, from where would the money come? Now, if you're going to pay the recipients equitably, what that means to me is if you only had $30 million and you had 1,000 more claimants than you had, if you divided the number of 30 million by the number of claimants, then you would reduce the amount paid to each person. That would be an equitable distribution. But it's time to stop here for a second and understand what's really going on. Now, you recall the governor didn't like the RISE Act. She allowed it to become law without her signature. She said the money's not there. Then when the next bundle of federal money came along, she, by executive order, created the All Rise Program. And the All Rise Program used the same bracket that the All Rise Act did, but the money for the All Rise Program comes from the national government, and the governor doesn't need the legislature to appropriate the money because of the rule in Wong versus Kamina, which holds that money coming from the national government doesn't have to be appropriated by the local legislature. So the governor can pay as much as she wants out of this. Now, she said she didn't like the RISE Act because it didn't pay Government of Guam employees. She's paying Government of Guam employees now. That tells you this is not the RISE Act. This is something that she has made up out of whole cloth. So if 30 million, if Daphne stops at 30 million, it's because the governor said stop at 30 million. Because if the governor has the authority to pay this money out of federal funds to government employees, then she has enough money to pay everybody that is a claimant. Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is separate from the RISE Act?
Absolutely.
That means the RISE Act is still active because it wasn't passed into law?
It was passed into law.
It was not vetoed by the governor.
It was not vetoed. It was not repealed. So it's still flopping around on the books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's where the 30,000 is going to come from.
No, it's not.
Oh.
No, it's not, because there is no appropriation for the 30 million.
Uh-huh.
The bill itself said, take this, use money from the national government for this, but if you don't have any, then there's an appropriation for 30 million. And the governor said, all of this money that comes from the national government, I don't need no stinking legislature to appropriate it because of the rule in the case called Wong versus Kamina.
And she's not wrong.
And so then she says, so now I never liked this idea of not paying the government employees, none of whom lost a nickel during the pandemic, many of whom got paid to stay home. So I'm going to pay them. Well, the only way she can pay them is because she's using the Wong versus Kamina money, not the RISE Act money, which means the RISE Act is an interesting idea, and it lent a little bit of its title to what the governor's doing. But if the governor says $30 million, that's all, because of the RISE Act, this is another one of her fibs. If it's $30 million, that's all, it's because she doesn't want to spend any more money than that. And the last time we talked about this, I think it was yesterday, I mentioned this was the same way she handled the double pay for essential workers issue. The personnel rule said that common emergency, when an agency closed down, government employees stayed home but still got paid without charge to leave. Essential employees that actually had to go into the work site would be paid double, and all of the ones that went into the work site had the money spent. You know, they were already had their wish lists drawn up, etc. And we're wondering, when are we going to get that double pay? When are we going to get it? Well, it turns out later on, a couple months later, the government employees felt the burn when the director of administration said, no, we don't have to pay that. And he had a pretty good rationale for not paying it. So nobody got the double pay. And the governor knew, obviously, let me check my vocabulary lesson here. Yeah, the governor knew from the get-go that she wasn't going to pay it. Now, in a sense, I give her high marks because it's a stupid personnel rule, and it's an expense that we can't afford. But public officials should be upfront with their constituents, and she wasn't. And you remember the next chapter was 3 senators tripped over themselves to introduce bills to pay the double pay. One of whom was Tina Rose Munya Barnes, who waived the public hearing requirement for those 3 bills, one of which was hers, so that they could go to the floor the next day. And when they hit the floor, Senator Joe San Augustine, who has a modicum of common sense, Senator Joe San Augustine said, Madam Speaker, I move that we adjourn for a week so we can have public hearings on these bills. And so we're repeating the same song and dance here with the RISE Act. That's only $30 million from the RISE Act. But the RISE Act is only a footnote to what the governor's doing, which is her All Rise program. It would be, well, let me go on, finish up the editorial here. The RISE Act should have been repealed when the American Rescue Plan became law. The $30 million could have been put to much better use for the good of the entire community. Well, there was no 30. It's the same 30 million. Wow. Where did they find people to put this kind of stuff on paper? It could have been used to further bolster our public health. No, I'll read that sentence. The RISE Act should have been repealed when the American Rescue Plan became law. The $30 million could have been put to much better use for the good of the entire community. It is that $30 million. And I wonder if anybody is going to be able to untie this knot. I doubt it. It's easier just to kind of go along and look for cover so that when your constituents come to you, you can say, well, you need to talk to the governor because it's her program.
That's today's word of the day, concede.
Yeah. And the last paragraph, or the last sentence of the editorial, we're looking forward to hearing from the legislators who pushed the RISE Act. What will be done if the $30 million just isn't enough? I give up. All right. No blue star for the Daily News today. Probably ought to get a low grade, ought to get a D for that effort.
When will there be an editorial asking the governor these questions?
Never, because they don't understand.
It's her program?
Yeah, because they haven't followed along. It's the same old Daily News approach. You interview someone, whatever the someone tells you, you write it down and that's it. You don't ask for clarification. Certainly don't cross-examine. You don't ask the hard questions. The only question you ask the person that you're interviewing before you're done is you say, any more softballs you'd like me to throw to you? And so whatever you hear, you take for gospel, and instead of doing a little investigation and asking other people, right? What's the difference between the All Rise program and the Rise Act? You could have called Tall Tales, and I'd have told you. All right, going on to the Post. Gov Guam can efficiently collect taxes from defense contractors with the help of the military. Public Auditor Benjamin Cruz recently made a suggestion to simplify the collection of Guam taxes, particularly the gross receipts tax from contractors that do work on Guam for the military. There have been admissions by some in the government of Guam over the years that it's tough to track and make sure all the defense contractors pay their fair share of taxes on Guam. Well, you know, once again, are we dealing with editorial writers who don't know what they're writing about? Because our gross receipts tax is exactly that. It's a tax that businesses pay on the gross receipts. Now, I don't know exactly what the business structure of defense contractors is, but let's say that Halliburton comes out here to do a job on Anderson, and the contract requires Halliburton to submit invoices to the government of Guam on the 30th day of each month. Halliburton will then do a direct, as you were, the government of Guam will then do a direct deposit to Halliburton's bank in Washington, D.C. Is there a gross receipts tax payable on that payment? I wouldn't think so. Now, some of these companies are incorporated in Guam. Some are not incorporated in Guam, but licensed to do business in Guam. Some of them just come and do the work. So this is not all that simple. If it were, I suspect we'd have done it quite some time ago. The collection of taxes on Guam can be particularly challenging for the local government if contractors do not have a base or branch office on Guam. Yeah, because they might not owe the tax and simply fly in and out as needed to provide work on military construction projects for professional services. I suspect that independent contractors do exactly that. They fly in, engineers, architects, whatever, they fly in, they do their job, and they're gone. So let me reread that paragraph. The collection of taxes on Guam can be particularly challenging for local government contractors if contractors do not have a base or branch office on Guam and simply fly in and out as needed to provide work on military construction projects and for professional services. Right. The task can be viewed as challenging, but there is a simple route Gov Guam can try to take. It involves goodwill, cooperation, and legwork by the military and perhaps other federal government entities such as the Department of Treasury and the Department of the Interior. Well, if an independent contractor or even a contractor doesn't owe the tax because no office or base here on the island, then what kind of goodwill would you be looking for from the military, Treasury, or Interior? Would the kind of goodwill that would require them to lean on someone to pay a tax that they don't owe? That's not goodwill. There's another name for that. The island's elected public auditor suggested that GovGuam ask the military or the federal government in general to shave off the Guam tax payment that's due for every military contract on Guam at the point of payment to the contractor. Well, what are we going to shave off? Our gross receipts tax is a tax on the gross income of a company doing business on Guam. Essentially, the federal government would act as a collector, which then remits the money to GovGuam so that no tax generated by a military contract remains unaccounted for, unpaid, or paid late. There is a model for this process under Section 30 of the Organic Act. No, the Organic Act is a federal statute. It's an act of Congress. And it tells the taxing authorities exactly what they must do, not what they may do or what would be a gesture of goodwill. The editorial goes on to say, under the Organic Act, federal taxes derived from active members of the military and pensions paid to retired civilian federal employees and military retirees who reside on Guam are annually remitted by the federal government to Guam Treasury. That is until Tina and the Barnes 8 have Downs versus Bidwell overruled, and that'll be the end of that. Yeah. In fiscal 2020, the federal government remitted $69.93 million to Guam for federal tax advance payments under Section 30. With the island's tourist industry still struggling to recover, tax collections from the other leg of the local economy, defense spending, could be crucial to the local government's finances and to island residents who count on public services to continue even with the tourist sluggish rebound. As the host of an expanding military presence, it's only right for Guam to get some cooperation from the military to better collect taxes from defense contractors. Yeah, and then there's a little hyperbole here. We're supposed to be one Guam, Cruz said Monday, drawing quotes in the air as he spoke. We're offering to house 5,000 of their Marines here. We've talked about voluntarily being the relocation site for 18,000 to 70,000 Afghans. If we're one Guam, then do this for us and stop screwing us. If it's the law, yeah. If it's not the law, emotional appeals don't lie very well in the mouth of someone who holds himself out as the public auditor. Past military leaders stationed on Guam have used the phrase one Guam to indicate that the military will work with the local government. But first, the initiative should come from Guam officials. Guam's governor, senators, and congressional delegates must first ask the military to help make this happen. Local officials need to be speaking with one voice to ask for a Section 30-like arrangement. Well, maybe you should ask Congress. This could substantially help the local government in a financially challenging time. Guam senators can write a legislative resolution requesting that the federal government become the tax collector for defense contractors on Guam. Well, they could, because as part of their procedure, it's not necessary that the draftsman of the resolution know what he, she, or they is or are talking about. That's for sure. Yeah. A recently released Government Accountability Office report to Congress mentions that by GovGuam estimates, there are going to be defense projects on Guam that are collectively worth $1 billion. Cruz's office is currently conducting an audit of military projects as requested by Vice Speaker Barnes to investigate whether Guam taxes are being paid by all defense contractors now performing or that have performed work on Guam. The audit is still in the early stages, but Cruz raised concerns over the complexities involved, some of which I've just mentioned right here in the show. He said his team is learning that companies that come to Guam for military projects need to obtain only a certificate of authority from the Department of Rev Tax if they work exclusively within military bases, instead of needing a contractor's license. So let's make it harder for contractors to do their work here on the island. The OPA is now trying to determine from the Guam Department of Rev Tax and Naval Facilities Engineering Command, Marianas, which companies have these certificates and how much the companies are paying in taxes. The public auditor also said he wasn't sure that some companies are paying income tax on employees working on Guam. Cruz's remarks were made at a special economic services meeting with lawmakers. The military's and the federal government's cooperation will help Guam, especially with collecting taxes from defense contracts that are paid in stages or phases. Quote, I'm just saying, just pay the 5% of all contracts that you're giving out, Cruz said, referring to the Guam business privilege tax. He said about $4.8 billion in defense contracts has been paid out over the last 10 years for works performed on Guam. 5% of that's huge, Cruz said. The task will not take much out of our elected officials' time, but they will need to decide if this priority over their day-to-day activities. Yeah, how are we going to do this and go to the Matais? The task will not take much of our elected officials' time. Won't take much of the legislature's time, that's for sure. No blue star for you today, Guam Daily Post.
I found it amusing that this entire editorial ends with the public auditor going, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. I mean, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go from there to the card. You want to take a short break, Jose? Yeah, let's take a short break here.
Now on Guam, 511 Tactical, offering the largest selection of tactical apparel and gear for law enforcement, first responders, tactical operators, and recreational enthusiasts. We're located next to Bargain Tactical, Guam's largest firearms dealer. Find both stores, Route 16 Army Drive between the Dungeon and Little Langs. Open Monday through Friday, 10 to 7, Saturdays 10 to 5, and closed on Sunday. Visit us online at tacticalgearguam.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Gear Guam. 511 Tactical, now on Guam. Always be ready.
Get your shot and win big prizes, Guam. The Office of the Governor and the Guam Visitors Bureau presents Vax and Win, Guam. Protect our community by getting your shot and enter online at visitguam.com/vax for a chance to win. Starting June 14th through July 21st, weekly prizes of $10,000 cash and a brand new car will be given away to lucky residents who are fully vaccinated. That's 6 weeks of Vax and Win opportunities. Some conditions apply. Log on to visitguam.com/vax for official promo rules or to submit your entry today.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, so here we are with the card. This is what I got on the card. We start out with Steve. And remember, Steve is the only name that appears on the card that's not followed by a V, because it's not Steve versus anybody else. Steve is a bout all by himself, right?
One-man gang.
He is. Then I've got Lear, the guy that came over here to teach us, the lawyer that came here from California to teach us about legislative decorum. We've got Lear versus Therese. David Lebowski versus Docs. I've got some interesting material from David Lebowski. The Civil Service Commission versus the merit system. Now, you're wondering, I thought the merit system was a Civil Service Commission. Well, it should be. It should be, so long as the Civil Service Commission, the commissioners got it within their heads that their job is to apply the law, not to give people breaks. And then we've got newspapers versus us. It's an article from a newspaper. Asian Americans versus CRT. which is sort of a gray item on the card submitted by one of our tailgaters. House Appropriations Committee versus Guam, Wolf versus Journalism, and Turley versus Biden. So starting out with Steve. You'll recall that yesterday we talked about a news item where 3 people had been arrested for driving while intoxicated, one of whom was a police officer. This time it was apparently not Pedo's daughter. And there were some sort of strange aspects to the story. And yesterday morning, Troy called and gave Ray chapter and verse about what actually happened. And Troy posted that on Candid News today. So here's what Troy makes of it. Jesse Bachman, who is married to Guam police officer Rochelle Benavente Bachman, wrote a lengthy and detailed version of events the early morning of June 23 that led to the July 1 arrest of his wife and her co-workers. Now remember those 2 dates, June 23 and July 1. That's about a week apart. Quick addition there, right? According to Bachman, his wife, whom he admitted had a couple of alcoholic drinks before driving that night, tried to stop her 2 co-workers from driving because they were completely inebriated and a danger to the public behind the wheel. He said she and he followed the women, Reyes Sanchez and Karina Paulino, that Paulino drove so recklessly on the road she nearly hit a pedestrian, and that Paulino choked and assaulted Bachman when the couple cornered her at a residential driveway. Assault of a police officer? Ms. Bachman said that within minutes of the incident, Mr. Bachman said that within minutes of the incident, they reported his versions of the events to police officers. He said no sobriety tests were administered to any of the women. We don't do that. You know, just because someone acts really strangely and appears to be drunk, there's no sense administering field sobriety tests. This is called the rule in Jerry Kitchen, right? He said no sobriety tests were administered to any of the women, despite the police officers' knowledge they all were drinking and driving. He named at least 2 police officers in his version of the events, which he posted on Candid's Facebook page. According to Mr. Bachman, he overheard an Officer Wright, who was probably out on patrol with Officer Wrong. He heard an Officer Wright offer his wife to falsify his report, his police report, in order for Ms. Bachman to avoid being held accountable. She's a police officer. Doesn't go well for a police officer to be involved in a incident where people are intoxicated. And we learned from Jerry Kitchen that a police officer who rides with a drunken driver is committing an offense as far as the cops are concerned, because police officers aren't supposed to tolerate criminal activity. So in this situation, Officer Wright said to Mrs. Bachman, Rochelle Bachman, I'm going to write this up, but I won't write exactly what happened because, you're a cop and I don't want to get you in trouble. Apparently that's the way it went down. Mr. Bachman's version of events differ wildly from information provided by the Guam Police Department about the arrests. Candid, 1 week ago, first asked GPD spokesman Sergeant Paul Tapau whether Ms. Bachman and 2 other employees were arrested. Tapau was unaware of the arrest at that time. Well, he's only the public information officer. On Wednesday, Tapao released a statement confirming the arrest of the 3 women for driving while impaired and stated the police chief was made aware of the incident on June 24. Incident occurred on the 23rd. Steve found out about it on the 24th. There were no charges for assault, strangulation, disorderly conduct, or rioting contained in the Tapao statement. According to Katlina Chatrus, spokeswoman for the Office of the Attorney General, the incident occurred on June 23. The police chief was made aware of the incident June 24, and the arrests were made on July 1. Yeah, so I have this mental image. You know, a car is zigzagging down the street, all over hitting the curb and the island, etc. A police car running code approaches from the rear, pulls that car over, and says, go down to the next driveway and pull in there. I'm going to arrest you in about a week. So just make yourself comfortable here until I get around to arrest. Isn't that how it's usually done? You when you find someone who is guilty of DWI, you wait for a week to arrest that person.
I'll get to it when I get to it.
Yeah. Candid asked GPD several questions to fill gaps in the timeline in the story. Mr. Bachman, meanwhile, provided the following statement. 22 June, Rochelle and I were packing out my house, getting ready for my PCS. For you folks that don't understand military speak, that means permanent change of station. So they're leaving the island. She was invited by Rhea and Karina to go drink early in the night, and she told them she can't. We're busy, but if we finish, we'll meet them later. 11 p.m., as it were 11:30 p.m. rolls around when we're finishing up, so we decided to go meet them. We arrive at Men's Karaoke at approximately 11:40 p.m., and Rochelle orders everyone a drink. Rochelle is his wife. She orders a cranberry and Malibu. A cranberry and Malibu. I haven't had a drink this century, since 1999. Actually, I haven't had a drink since this millennium. But if I were to have one, it would not be a cranberry and Malibu, I can tell you that.
Not even if they put an umbrella.
Yeah. She finished that drink and orders another Malibu and cranberry. She drinks half of the drink. 1:30 a.m., last call. We leave. I notice her drink half full, so I drink it, and we go outside. This is really interesting. This guy can really tell a story, right? Yeah. You know, the lady that, what was the name of the lady that wrote the Harry Potter stories?
J.K. Rowling?
Yeah, she's got competition right here, man.
Mm-hmm.
When this guy puts pen to paper, he can really write. 1:30 a.m., last call, we leave. I notice her drink half full, so I drink it, and we go outside. We had noticed the other females were incredibly intoxicated. We asked them not to drive. Karina gets behind the wheel and drives anyway. I tell Rochelle we need to follow them. Karina almost hits the raised median multiple times up Santos Hill, stops in the middle of the intersection at the top of the hill during a red light. Rochelle is on the phone with them, telling them to pull over, and Karina runs the red light, driving towards Micronesia Mall. Light turns green, and we get behind them again, and she turns left by Micronesia Mall, nearly hitting a pedestrian. They hang up the phone and continue driving at excessive speeds as it starts to rain near the overpass. They hang up the phone and continue driving at excessive speeds as it started to rain near the overpass. We lose sight of the vehicle, and Rochelle believes they might be going to Rhea's residence. We see them near the neighborhood, and Karina again takes off and attempted to lose us, blowing through all the neighborhood stop signs. I'm glad I wasn't out that night. Rochelle did not remember exactly where Rhea lived. However, we saw their vehicle at an intersection. We saw them pull into the driveway, and Rochelle blocked the exit. We approached them, and as they exited the vehicle, Rochelle asked for the keys. Karina said, "We're not doing this again." Both of us begged her not to drive the remainder of the way home and informed her of how bad she was driving in the first place. Karina finally placed the keys on top of the car and said, "Take them," and Rochelle grabbed the keys. Karina attempted to pry the car keys from Rochelle's hand and did not succeed. Eventually, Karina reached for Rochelle's neck to strangle her, and Rochelle pushed her away. This happened a couple of times, then Karina grabbed Rochelle by the hair. Wow. Talk about the card. Rhea and I separated the two. Rochelle asked me to sit in her car in the event Karina tried to take her car. Rhea and I heard and saw Rhea's vehicle start and drive off. Karina and Rochelle were still in front of the house. As I sat in the car, I heard a loud thud, and I saw Karina and Rochelle on the ground. I run over, and Rochelle is telling her to stop attacking her. Again, Karina has Rochelle by the hair, so I remove her hands, and Rochelle is able to stand up. Karina attacks Rochelle approximately 5 or 10 more times, to include a bite mark on her wrist that will have a permanent scar. It's too bad somebody didn't put this on video. This is primetime TV. We forget about this MMA stuff, right? We call the police, and Officer Wright and 3 others show up. We give them the rundown of what happened, and it started to rain on us outside. We agreed to meet at the police station, and they saw Rochelle get in the driver's seat and me in the passenger seat. We get to the police station, and Officer Wright sees Rochelle get out of the driver's seat, approached her, and asked her what she wanted to do about the attacks. Rochelle did not want to press charges and told another officer to take her home and requested that she be given a ride home. Meanwhile, Rhea is missing from when she drove off, apparently has a flat tire, and is not answering her phone. Rochelle tells Officer Wright she's going to look for Rhea. He informs her to let him know if we find her. Officer Wright calls Rochelle and informed her that the on-duty supervisor wanted statements. So we drove back to the police department to fill out a statement. They see us arrive and see Rochelle exit the driver's seat. Still no arrests or impairments seen. No sobriety tests were conducted. No breathalyzer conducted. And the officer witnessed Rochelle driving on multiple occasions. A couple days later, we're informed Highway Patrol was investing Karina for DUI. Even then, I was confused because the police officers did not witness Karina driving intoxicated. We went to make statements at Highway Patrol. We were informed the chief of police mandated in an investigation because he was scared of, guess what? Candid News. And he should be scared of Candid News after that whole Jeep throat incident at Jerry Kitchen. Now, we haven't got to the really meaty part of this story, which deals with the theft of Steve's motorcycle. But let's take a short break and we'll come right back.
Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumont. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community. Get national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
It's a grand old flag. Okay, so where did we leave off here? Yeah.
Chief Ignacio was afraid of Candid.
We went to make statements at the Highway Patrol. We were informed the chief of police mandated an investigation because he was scared of Candid News. Multiple officers from Highway Patrol stated the same, including the lead investigator officer, Officer Laksamana. During my statement, I identified who had which drinks, and they also had surveillance footage from the establishments, or at least that's what they said. On 1 July 2021, Rochelle was called back into Highway. When we arrived, Officer Laksamana informed Rochelle that the chief has ordered them all to be arrested. Arrest them all and let God sort it out. Officer insisted Officer Wright's report was the probable cause needed to make the arrest. The same officer that witnessed her drive multiple occasions and had normal conversations with her the evening of. He wrote in his report that Rochelle was highly intoxicated and he could smell alcohol emitting from her breath and backed it by his air ride training. The same officer stated in his report that he instructed me to drive. First of all, I was never instructed to drive, and second of all, I was actually drinking that evening. So if his air ride training was so keen, why would I have been instructed to drive? I also overheard a conversation between Rochelle and Officer Wright. Officer Wright informed her that in his report, he was going to say she didn't drive and told me to drive. I told her that he never said that, and there's no reason to lie about this situation. So this story has everything it needs to garner an Academy Award, except a red Jeep. It's too bad that the Bachmans weren't driving a red Jeep, and this would fit the pattern, wouldn't it? But Chief Ignacio, this is not something that you kind of just brush aside and let it go. You got one of your officers who was arrested, and you got now a public accusation of misconduct on the part of another officer. And then you have arrests, if these people were actually arrested, that don't seem to me to be lawful. And the rule is that in order to make an arrest without a warrant, in the case of a misdemeanor, the officer has to see the misdemeanor committed in his presence. He has to see it himself. So to say, well, I looked at all these reports and there's enough there for an arrest, that's why we're arresting you, not for a misdemeanor. Now, maybe Mr. Bachman got mixed up. Maybe the three women were given citations or something like that. But if they were arrested and taken to the Crossbar Hotel, it's not a good situation at all. But as usual, our chief of police, and by the way, there's nothing in here about Steve's motorcycle, so I feel like we kind of got shortchanged. But as usual, our chief of police, Steve Ignacio, is also known as Mr. Communication. He will keep us informed as to everything that's going on here with what appears on its face to be another police department scandal. We'll watch it like a hawk. Okay, going on to the next item on the card, which is Lear versus Therese. This is something that ran on PNC News, and contrary to PNC's usual procedure, it's not a press release from one of the people mentioned in the story. It must be a story actually written by a reporter. And here's the title. So did Speaker Terlahi meet with doctors to discuss Bill 112? More information has surfaced with regard to the infamous lawyer outburst that occurred at Guam legislature on Monday. Infamous? That's kind of an exaggeration there, Guam PNC News. Kind of an exaggeration. Remember, that's my job, not yours. During the second public hearing for the controversial Bill 112, the medical malpractice bill introduced by Speaker Therese Terlahi, those for and against the bill made their arguments. During the hearing, attorney Edward Lear caused the now infamous, boy, they like that word infamous, right? Infamous commotion by continuing to speak even after his allotted time had passed. Lear, a California lawyer hired by radiologist Dr. Nathaniel Berg, said he was not picking between the two sides. He was just analyzing Bill 112. We've heard that one before. Yeah. This is what we would call the Chief Justice. I'm not taking a position one way or another. It's just that I hate Bill 112. In an interview with News Talk K57's Patty Arroyo, Lear talked about his statements toward the speaker as he was being escorted out of the legislature's public hearing room. So as he's being escorted out, I saw this, and he's trying to holler or do something. He's a long way from the speaker. And the legislature's mics didn't pick up what he said, but here's his own rendition of it. And we'll come back. We'll leer at this whole procedure here right after the big halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Standoff over. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Police in Leveland, Texas say they've arrested the man suspected in Thursday's killing of a police officer.
We have taken one suspect into custody at this point. The subject's name is Omar Soto Chavira, 22-year-old Hispanic male. And at this point, he does appear to be injured.
Chief Albert Garcia says the Lubbock County Sheriff's Department's robot located the man inside a mobile home and forced him out with a chemical irritant. The county SWAT team's commander, Sergeant Josh Bartlett, was shot and killed, responding to reports of a man with a gun. 3 other officers were wounded, one of them reported to be critical but stable following surgery. The White House confirms it's monitoring and flagging social media posts about the coronavirus.
The White House admitted that it is actively searching searching out what it believes could be COVID-19 misinformation and flagging problematic posts for social media giant Facebook. The admission drew howls of protest both from conservatives and by a growing number of concerned libertarians, many of whom are increasingly worried about the sudden cozy relationship between the political left and the security state.
Fox's Kevin Cork. Los Angeles County's health department is telling residents to dust off their face masks and start wearing them again this weekend, even if they've been fully vaccinated. It's an effort to slow the spread of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. The State Department is investigating the United Nations to send teams to investigate racial issues in the U.S. Florida Congressman Michael Waltz telling Fox News at Night it's indicative of the administration's foreign policy.
They believe fundamentally in two things, that America is more part of the problem around the world than it is a solution, and that if we apologize enough, concede enough, and give enough, that the rest of the world will be nice back to us. That's not how our adversaries operate.
America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
It's deadline day for candidates to file to be the alternative in California's upcoming recall election for Governor Gavin Newsom.
There are at least 26 Republicans, 16 Democrats, 11 no-party preference, 3 Green Party, and 1 American Independent candidates who filed a run in California's recall election against Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom over his policies from virus lockdowns to immigration to taxes. And with just hours to go for other candidates to pay the $4,000 filing fee, plus 7,000 signatures to jump into the race, in which voters will soon be asked 2 questions. Do they want to recall the governor? And who do they want to replace him? More than 50% of voters in the liberal state have to vote yes to the first question. For the second one to apply. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo will sit down with investigators for the state legislature this weekend to answer questions about allegations of sexual misconduct. The governor has denied any wrongdoing and has rejected calls for him to resign. The world's oldest profession is making a comeback on the streets of New York City.
Cops used to haul prostitutes on the street into the station, but lately they've turned a blind eye to it all. So now what was largely conducted behind closed doors has turned into a blatant open-air market. The New York Post reporting that scantily clad women walk in clear view, attracting a steady stream of slowly moving cars driven by men looking for pleasures of the flesh. Cops telling the Post the trend began when the Brooklyn DA turned away from prosecuting prostitution arrests. In New York, Gary Baumgarten, Fox News.
Devastating floods in Germany and Belgium now being blamed for 90 deaths. The fear is that number will grow as hundreds of people are listed as missing. 9 of the dead were residents of an assisted living facility in the path of the floodwaters. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
A 1 and a 2 and a you know what to do.
We're happy to celebrate 77 years. Thank you, Uncle Samuel, the reason we're here. Happy Liberation Day, Guahan. Bank Pacific's here for you.
Viva Liberation!
Viva! Viva Bank Pacific!
Viva!
Viva Guahan!
Viva!
Member FDIC.
Relax and unwind with daily happy hours at the Westin Resort Guam. Enjoy 30% off our newly curated menu. Bud Bucket special starting at $20 or Leaping Horse wine specials for only $5. Available from 5 to 7 p.m. at Mix at Cha-Cha-Cha or savor the flavors of Taste Restaurant featuring international cuisine and your favorite seafood station on ice. Enjoy bottomless Bud Family beer and Leaping Horse wine specials while you groove to the smooth sounds of Jesse and Ruby. Call 647-1020 for reservations. Budweiser reminds you to please drink responsibly.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Okay, so here we are back on the air with Tall Tales. I'm leering at the story that ran on PNC. And I pick it up here. Lear, a California lawyer hired by radiologist Dr. Nathaniel Berg, said he was not picking between the two sides. He was just analyzing Bill 112. In an interview with News Talk K57's Patty Arroyo, Lear talked about his statements toward the speaker as he was being escorted out of the legislature's public hearing room, trying to confirm a meeting that was supposedly held between doctors and the speaker to come up with a new solution to the issue. Quote, "If you watched, you might have heard me say again as I was being escorted out, 'Senator, please confirm that you met with the doctors. Please confirm that there's a proposed solution on the board. Please confirm that it involves notification of grievance, mediation, arbitration, and travel.'" I've seen a lot of public hearings at the legislature. I've been to a lot of them myself. I've testified at a lot of them. I've sat in on a lot of them. I chaired them. But this is something I've never seen before. Someone who's being escorted out and repeatedly asks the senator presiding over the hearing to confirm this, that, and the other thing. Generally, people go to appear at public hearings as witnesses, and their speech is confined to the subject matter of the bill before the committee. Lear goes on to say, "I was trying to get the senator to commit that there is a proposed solution that is different from the bill, so that the discussion can be based upon that four-pronged solution." A really strange way of attempting to persuade people to see things your way. Nurse Carla Haddock said in a separate interview with Patty Arroyo that she, along with Dr. Vincent Duenas and Dr. Jolene Uggan, did have a virtual meeting with the speaker to come up with a new solution to medical malpractice. Quote, "Yes, absolutely. In fact, there were two meetings. After the first public hearing, the speaker, in good faith," here we go, "reached out to Dr. Vinnie Duenas and Dr. Jolene Uggan." I wish we had that soundtrack, you know. I'll be there, right? About their testimonies and asked to sit down to meet. She invited those two to a Zoom meeting on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. I actually joined in on the meeting because I knew a little bit about the issue and they wanted to ask me for support, Haddock said. They supposedly agreed on a four-pronged solution that had members of the medical community excited. However, during the public hearing on Monday, Speaker Titlahi did not acknowledge that the meeting took place. According to an anonymous source, which makes it 15 times more powerful than if we knew who it was, an anonymous source, right? You know, they just reached new heights of journalistic excellence at PNC.
They were doing so well with this article.
Yeah. According to an anonymous source, Speaker Titlahi expressed extreme displeasure with Haddock talking to the media.
Was Haddock the doctor who just gave birth?
Haddock is the nurse who showed up with baby.
Yeah, with the baby, that's right.
Two different hearings.
And then read the testimony from Mariana Leon Guerrero.
Yeah.
Cook, I don't know the name.
Testifying for a friend. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. And then Nate Berg spoke to the Rotary Club, and I've got his remarks here. This is what Nate Berg says: giving patients who are upset with medical outcomes an opportunity to sit down and speak with doctors could be a solution to many instances of perceived medical negligence, Dr. Nathaniel Berg told the Rotary Club of Guam Thursday. Berg, the chair of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, spoke to Rotarians at the Three Squares restaurant in Tamuning about Bill 112, legislation that would repeal the law that requires medical negligence claims on Guam to first be screened by a panel of arbitrators. Medicine is a profession unlike others in terms of risk, Berg explained, noting that there's no assurance a patient getting an operation will get the outcome he or she desires. Some patients aren't aware of how risks are managed, which leads them to feeling that some sort of medical negligence had occurred. When you have situations in which communications is improved in medicine between the doctor and a patient, that's the solution to the vast majority of negligence claims. I guess there's nothing stopping doctors from communicating with their patients. Right?
No, if they show up.
Yeah. He said patients should sit down with doctors after an unwanted outcome to air grievances. Doctors should then get a chance to explain what happened and apologize, if they needed to prevent unnecessary negligence claims. If not successful, patients could proceed to mediation. Berg said courts rule in favor of physicians in about 85% of malpractice claims. Berg hired attorney Ed Lear, who chairs a commission evaluating the effectiveness of malpractice laws in California. That's not what I read. A commission evaluating the effectiveness of laws. I didn't see the word malpractice in the research I did on Lear. To find a solution to the dispute over Bill 112. Lear proposed the grievance and mediation process, but was also in favor of a streamlined arbitration with one arbitrator instead of the three currently required. Berg said Guam's medical community favored having the government of Guam fund arbitration costs for indigent patients. Of course. Of course, they would like to have the government of Guam funded. Here's a radical solution. If doctors really want arbitration, perhaps they could ask that the law be changed so that the defendant who wants arbitration would pay the bill. He said doctors have met with senators to discuss this proposed solution and were hopeful lawmakers would see its value. Okay. And one more. Several doctors met with lawmakers. Wait a minute. I already read this one, I think. I've got another one here. I'm going to go right to the next item on the card, which is Lebowski versus doctors. And Lebowski has wrote to the Speaker and to Tello. And he says that, I'll just read parts of this letter. I wanted to throw my 2 cents into the meetings over the last weekend and any closed door meetings happening with doctors and medical people, if I can, please. Well, first you got to go down to the next public hearing, David, and then you have to be there in person and start speaking. And when your term is over, keep speaking. And as you're being wheeled out of the room, escorted out of the room, then you holler at the speaker. That's how you do about doing it, I guess. He said the change in the arbitration law is important. I want full repeal, but support for Bill 112 is middle ground. It puzzles me as to why all stakeholders are not involved with closed-door meetings with the doctors. And then he says, it's my opinion that doctors as a group will never come up with an impartial package for all. Well, and I would suspect that's probably right. And I would suspect probably that the Lebowski side would never come up with an impartial solution either. That generally isn't the way human relations work. If two people are interested in the same subject, each one advances his own proposition, and sometimes there's a compromise, but it's not often that one side just caves into the other, unless they happen to be married. As an example, you need to buy a new car, so you go shopping for a car. You're walking around the lot with the salesman. The salesman says, "Oh, this one right here, boy, this car is only $12,000. It's probably worth about $15,000." And the buyer says, "This piece of junk? I'll tell you what. You give me $50 and I'll have it towed to the junkyard. $15,000? You got to be kidding." And the salesman said, "Well, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit high. I'll come down to $14,500. And the buyer says, "That's still way too much." And they go back and forth, back and forth. The buyer pays more than $12,000. The seller gets less than $15,000. That's ordinarily the way it works out. You don't expect to go in and buy a used car and expect that the salesman is going to be fair and impartial. If that's the case with used cars, when you're talking about doctors and their livelihood, you're really looking for something really big. And with David Lebowski, of course, given his investment in all of this, he has indicated some flexibility. He said he wants full repeal, but he sees Bill 112 as a middle ground. He'd just like to have the opportunity to say his piece. He says, "The following is my rough proposal as an alternative or for related amendment if needed for Bill 112 to be added to discussions behind closed doors." I wish he wouldn't use the word closed doors so often. You know, after all, he's not a senator. Where does he get off thinking that he can have meetings behind closed doors? Yeah. He says, "I propose as follows, and to allow 3 years to file a malpractice case." He says, once a case is filed, a 6-month, quote, cooling off period should begin in which 2 things should happen. 1, claimant and defendant would submit their claims to either an off-island organization for peer review like Mountain Pacific Quality Health, which is a quality innovation network, quality improvement organization that has served Guam, I am told, in the past. Now, I wasn't aware that there are such organizations, but this so far makes a whole lot of sense. If there is a group off-island composed of medical experts who could look at the papers, et cetera, from something like this, perhaps go the whole way, or maybe at least just screening to say, yes, the plaintiff does state a legitimate claim here. We're not saying he's going to recover, but he does state a legitimate claim. I could see some real advantages there. One of the things that I understand about trying to do things on Guam with respect to doctors is that the doctors have their own version of the blue wall. No doctor wants to come forward and be accusatory of another doctor because it's a small island, a small medical community. You come along today and you say, that doctor did not comply with the ordinary standard today, and tomorrow you're depending on him for one of your patients. So if there is a group of experts off-island that could have a crack at this, I could see a certain amount of merit to that. Lebowski's idea is that they would be tasked to look at the issues and make recommendations to help overall care on Guam and to make the community healthier to ultimately lower health costs. They could compile info, look at trends on Guam, such as problems at certain neonatal ward or issues that repeat themselves over and over at certain clinics, etc. They are off-island, so there will not be the local inherent bias that has been discussed by attorney Mitch Thompson and others. The inherent bias is what you call hometowning, that the doctors are going to stick with their homies. This organization or a similar organization will do a peer review of the malpractice claim or any complaints against doctors that the Board of Examiners, the GBME, receives. 2, mediation should happen during the 6-month period, which is not mandatory. The information from the peer review, step 1, can be used during the mediation for discussion and to try to resolve cases before they go to the next step. All costs are the responsibility of the doctor or the clinic, or can be covered by a fund set up like a super fund requiring doctors to put in $2,500 per year each. This is pennies compared to malpractice costs. Claimants or defendants can waive, and he goes on to say, claimants or defendants can waive the mediation. Now, this is an interesting idea, that these dispute resolution measures that Lebowski proposes ought to be funded by the doctors. And that, to me, makes a great deal of sense, you know. The current situation where plaintiffs have to fund it, and then something no one has talked about except on Tall Tales here, is our current law that says that if after the arbitration is completed and the plaintiff sues, if he doesn't recover 40% more than the arbitration award, he has to pay all the costs. Yeah, including attorney's fees. That's really draconian. At the end of 6 months, if the case is not resolved through the attempted mediation, then parties should be allowed to proceed to court via conciliation process similar to what Hawaii has. A medical inquiry and conciliation panel, similar to Hawaii, before a medical malpractice lawsuit can be filed in court. It requires that the prospective plaintiff submit an inquiry to a medical inquiry and conciliation panel consisting of 1 attorney and 1 properly licensed physician. And he says who should not be from Guam. The inquiry is similar in Hawaii, must include the facts on which the lawsuit will be based, and the name of all healthcare providers who might be included in the suit. After receiving the inquiry, giving notice to all named care providers and giving each provider a chance to file a written response, the panel sets a date to consider all evidence, review medical records, and hear from witnesses. The panel then issues a review of information decision. This information cannot be used in court, but the decision should not prevent court. The goal of the MICP process is to provide a non-adversarial review of claims by patients and their families and to facilitate the conveyance of information without assignment of blame. When the parties are not able to resolve their dispute, the MICP process attempts to narrow and define the claims and to address questions of causation, liability, and damages in order to help the parties better understand the nature of the claims and to help encourage them to reach a voluntary settlement. Statements made during the course of the MICP process and any recommendations made as a result of that process are not admissible in later proceedings. The proceeding is not closed to others unless both parties agree. The information from the peer review by Mountain Pacific Quality Health or a similar company would be admissible to the MICP. If the parties cannot come to an agreement, a court case is allowed. No part of the process is secretive. Well, that's pretty elaborate, and it's pretty complicated. And it causes me to ask, if you just go to court, isn't that more straightforward and actually simpler? But give David Lebowski really high marks here for doing some in-depth thinking. He's got a little bit more, but I think we'll head for Wrigley Field before we come back to what he has to say.
Get your shot and win big prizes, Guam. The Office of the Governor and the Guam Visitors Bureau presents Vaccine Win Guam. Protect our community by getting your shot and enter online at visitguam.com/vax for a chance to win. Starting June 14th to July 21st, we'll be giving away weekly prizes of $10,000 cash and a brand new car to lucky residents who are fully vaccinated. That's 6 weeks of Vaccine Win opportunities. Some conditions apply. Log on to visitguam.com/vax for official promo rules or to submit your entry today. Let's Vaccine Win, Guam!
This Liberation Day, join PBS Guam as we take you village to village, paying tribute to those who've made sacrifices for us to live as we do today. Tune in on July 21st at 9 a.m. and experience over 3 hours of exclusive interviews, musical performances, and more. This celebration of Guam's 77th will air on PBS Guam, KGTF, Channel 12, and streaming on the PBS Guam Facebook and YouTube pages. This special broadcast is made possible by PBS Guam, our generous supporters, and Choice Broadcasting.
Okay, so here we are at Wrigley Field in Chicago, the world's most beautiful ballpark. That means just 2 innings of tall tales left for this week. Wow, it's tough, but Jose and I'll handle it. Lebowski goes on to talk about legal fees, collateral source rules, etc. And he said legal fees should be separate of the settlement and based on the current formulas as set forth in law. Any settlement will be plus legal fees as set in current law. Well, current law is that each party bears his own legal fees. And then he talks about the collateral source rule, which is probably not very many folks understand. Under the traditional collateral source rule, payments received by the malpractice victim from third parties, such as medical insurance companies, would not be considered in the calculation of damages. Hawaii applies this common law rule. It's an American common law rule, the collateral sources rule. And then he goes on to say the Patient Protection Through Information Act, which is already Guam law, should be reinforced in any new legislation. The Guam Board of Medical Examiners should put it on their website with information about doctors immediately, as should other government agencies and hospitals. It's 8 years and the GBME has not implemented this. Then he goes on to talk about peer reviews. The Guam Board of Medical Examiners should use peer reviews when they have complaints about doctors, but these reviews should be sent off island as stated. The board has biases, as we have heard. A peer review is a form of self-regulation by neutral, qualified members of a profession within the relevant field. As attorney Mitch Thompson, an attorney for doctors, accurately said, Guam doctors do not want to judge their colleagues. There is no protection for us as consumers. The Guam Medical Examiners Board has proven over and over again. And now David Lebowski is shouting. He's using all caps here, yeah. Any change in the law should not include Guam doctors to oversee complaint of other doctors, per what attorney Mitch Thompson said. And what we have experienced personally. They are not impartial and will not protect our interests over their own or their colleagues. This has been proven with their reluctance to implement the Patient Protection Through Information Act. End of all caps. The Guam Board of Medical Examiners, under its current status and makeup, should have no involvement in these cases. They have never favored a complaint and have a host of issues that I won't name now, but suffice it to say, they are being taken to court. I support Bill 112 as written, but wanted to add to discussion behind closed doors. Another idea is that senators, per my discussion with the Election Commission, can put the question up for a vote during the next. No, I don't think so. This is hard enough for doctors, lawyers, and people like me that spend some time studying this to try to come and understand it. And to have a simple yes or no on a ballot would not serve anybody. Okay, that's David Lebowski, who, love him or hate him, is the guy that actually started this whole thing. And I can completely understand why the tragic death of his son Asher would be enough to motivate anybody to take the kind of actions and get involved the way David Lebowski has, and I take my hat off to him. In a free society, we depend on the David Lebowskis of society to make things happen. If we're all passive and accommodating and say, well, I really, it was wrong, but I didn't want to say anything. I understand there's a philosopher, and I've read this, and I'm going to paraphrase. There's a British philosopher, George Bernard Shaw, paraphrasing, who said, all progress depends on unreasonable men. So often a reasonable man is not going to stick his neck out. He's not going to go the extra mile. Throw in a few more cliches there. Is not going to abandon his own comfort zone to chase after something that will benefit him, and in the process probably benefit an awful lot of other people. So I suspect that David Lebowski is not going to be invited to the Medical Society Christmas party this year, but he rates pretty high in my book. Okay, so let's see. We've got... He's got about an inning and a half left to go. And now it's time for me to pound on the Civil Service Commission. Fired school bus driver's case being reviewed for stricter burden of proof. Commissioners of the Civil Service Commission have remanded a recommendation for the job termination of former school bus driver Karen Madluck, so that the administrative law judge can reassess using a different burden of proof. Now, you remember the Civil Service Commission got so backlogged that they hired somebody named Eric Miller to be an administrative law judge. So for many of the cases, the parties appear before the administrative law judge. They call witnesses. They make their legal arguments. They go through the whole thing instead of going through it in front of the 7 commissioners. It's much faster. Since Miller is a lawyer, we would expect a higher quality of decision, more law and fact-finding, less emotion involved. And I thought it was a pretty good idea when it came along. But it's only a good idea if the commissioners understand what an administrative law judge does and what the law is. So, going back to the article, the recommendation was not read during the hearing Thursday as CSC Chairman Juan Calvo. Now, Juan Calvo used to be the personal management analyst at the Civil Service Commission. So he was a long-time Civil Service Commission employee. I'm not going to do it now, but sometime when there's a gap in the show, I'm going to tell you why a person who worked for an agency should never be on the governing board of that agency. As an example, I should never, ever be on the Board of Education. I've been the director of education. It doesn't work. And I'm not going to explain it now, but I'll explain it some other time. So, Juan Calvo informed commissioners he would make the motion to have Administrative Law Judge Eric Miller use what's known as a clear and convincing burden of proof. So let's turn on the Law and Order notebooks here, Jose. We have, I think, 4 different standards of proof that are dealt with in any kind of tribunal that takes evidence. You start out with beyond a reasonable doubt. In order to convict someone of a crime, you must be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crime in the absence of excuse or defense with the proper state of mind at the time the crime was committed. Beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you're going to establish numerical values here, you're talking beyond a reasonable doubt is somewhere, the needle is up there somewhere in the high 90s. The next standard after that is clear and convincing evidence. But before I get to that, I'm going to go to preponderance of the evidence. Now, preponderance of the evidence is the ordinary standard in a civil case. In other words, after the jury has heard the evidence, they say it's more likely than not that this party should win and this party should lose. So if you're going to assign numerical values to preponderance of the evidence, 51 to 49, that's all you need to win a civil case. Now, you'll recall that O.J. Simpson was the defendant in a murder case accused of killing his wife, Nicole Simpson, and a guy named Ron Goldman. And when the trial was over, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. Riots erupted all over Los Angeles, looting. No, I'm sorry, that didn't happen, did it?
Almost.
I'm thinking of another case. Yeah, not that one.
Not that one.
Not that one, yeah. But Goldman's parents brought a civil suit against O.J. Simpson, and they were able to prove by a preponderance of evidence that Simpson had killed their son, Ron Goldman. And they recovered a multi-million-dollar judgment from Simpson after that trial. So that's the difference. A person could be not guilty in a criminal trial and guilty or liable in a civil trial. And it could go the other way around, too. So preponderance of the evidence is the way most civil cases are decided. Clear and convincing evidence requires a greater quantum of proof than preponderance of the evidence. And if you're going to score it, you're probably talking it somewhere in the low 70s, 51, 70, 98, 99. And the statute says for Civil Service Commission cases, in order for management to prevail, management must prove its case by clear and convincing evidence, which really tilts the table towards the employee. Now, there's one other standard of evidence that applies in civil service cases, and that is substantial evidence. Substantial evidence is probably down in the 35 to 40% range. Substantial evidence means this: you listen to all the evidence, and after you've heard it all, you say, that seems about right. That's substantial evidence. Okay, now Juan Calvo informed commissioners he would make a motion to have Administrative Law Judge Eric Miller use what's known as clear and convincing evidence. Calvo said Miller's report is based on substantial evidence, which is a lesser burden of proof that applies to adverse action cases involving alleged felonies or misdemeanors. The clear and convincing standard applies in cases of alleged violations of personnel rules. Now, here's Calvo. To me, that's not the appropriate venue to decide on that case. Well, a venue is a place. It's not a standard. But that's kind of the quality that you can get out of the Civil Service Commission. He said substantial evidence because of employee Karen Matlock was never criminally charged. Now remember that. He said it can't be substantial evidence because Karen was never criminally charged. Calvo said, adding that he did not see reports from Child Protective Services, the police, or the Office of the Attorney General indicating criminal charges against Matlock. So he says since she was never charged, it can't be substantial evidence. It's got to be clear and convincing. Probably saying at the same time, that idiot Eric Miller, what does he think he's doing? He doesn't know the law as well as I do. So substantial evidence should not be applied. It should be a clear and convincing standard. His fellow commissioners agreed and voted to remand Miller's recommendation for reassessment. Now, here's point number one of the point I made earlier. The other commissioners are sitting there saying, well, Calvo worked for the Civil Service Commission for a long, long time, so he probably knows a lot more about it than I do, so I think I better go along with what he said. Matlock is a former bus driver and implicated in a widely publicized bus stop incident in which two siblings were reportedly forced off her bus nowhere near their home after they boarded the wrong bus. Well, let's head for Churchill Downs, and then I'll finish this up on the home stretch.
Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tucumán for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet, the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tucumán, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
Attention men and women in uniform, veterans and reservists. Get ready for the 77th Liberation Hike and Bike. Get up and move with the Silkies Hike. And easy bike along Marine Corps Drive with stops at historic sites and monuments with a super hot cool down at Paseo. Hike rally at 7 a.m. on Liberation Day in Assen. Bike rally 7 a.m. at Paseo. Let's beat suicide with humor and camaraderie. Sign up at Eventbrite. Look for Silkies Hike Guam 1 and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Made possible by Gotcha 671, Irreverent Warriors, Freedom Grinders, and Veterans Helping Veterans.
So here we are, Churchill Downs, as you were. Yeah, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, heading down the home stretch for the last episode of Tall Tales this week. Whoa, what a bummer. But we'll get through it, Jose. We'll make it. We'll be back.
We shall overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Counsel for the government said had Karen complied with the training and safety and the practices and protocols and taken these children back to the school, which was Atacol Elementary, there wouldn't have been a problem. She would not have been disciplined. But her defense counsel, now they let non-lawyers defend cases at the Civil Service Commission, which is another story in itself, said that there's only one copy of the DPW bus manual in existence, and management stated during the hearing that it's not available to employees. So, you know, if two little kids say, this isn't where I live, this isn't my bus stop, you say to the children, well, I don't know if that's right or not because I haven't seen the manual. That would be the appropriate answer. The supervisor stated that bus drivers are told to return students to school when they're on the wrong bus during DPW meetings, but could not say if Matlock was in the meeting, and management could not confirm that they have training meetings or counseling that addresses such incidents, according to LaVille. This was also Madlock's first offense after 9 years working at DPW, and LaVelle contends her client was not afforded progressive discipline. Well, you know, with one like this, put yourself in the place of the parents here. You know, your children are stumbling around at the wrong bus stop. But I don't want to get into that. I just want to talk about the law. Now, remember, Juan Calvo based his decision to make a motion to remand back to Eric Miller because there was no arrests, no papers from Child Protective Services, etc. Here's what the law says at 4 GCA 4407. Upon the hearing of any adverse action appeal, the burden of proof shall be on the government to show clearly and convincingly that the action of the branch, etc., was correct. Upon hearing of a grievance immaterial. And then C, in cases involving charges which could be a crime, if the person was charged in a criminal action, the commission shall determine the matter based upon substantial evidence that the employee committed the acts charged. I read it again. In cases involving charges which could be a crime, if the person was charged in a criminal action, so Calvo is just completely off base. There doesn't have to be a prosecution for substantial evidence to apply. And the Supreme Court, within the last year, I probably should have brought the case, ruled on this very matter about substantial evidence. And they said the reason for this is because the standard is so high in a criminal case that this matter would not, a potentially criminal matter might not properly be dealt with by the criminal justice system, but the employee should no longer be employed by that agency. So Cal was just dead wrong on the law. And then besides that, there's no question here as to the facts. According to this article, the bus driver let the kids off at the wrong bus stop. Whether it's, according to what I read here and my knowledge of the case, it wouldn't matter. Substantial evidence, preponderance, clear and convincing, or beyond a reasonable doubt. What changes? It's just that, some people get on the Civil Service Commission and instead of ruling with their brain housing group, they want to rule with their the lower part of their alimentary canal. So if letting the employee, not finding the employee culpable or reducing his punishment to a suspension from a termination would make their tummy feel warm, well, I think that's what the Civil Service Commission is for. It's all about warm tummies. And this kind of decision-making really makes us wonder if Juan Calvo and the commission really understand the efficacy of having an administrative law judge who understands all of the things I'm saying here because he's a lawyer. He doesn't have to rule based on what causes his anal sphincter to spasm and his tummy to feel nice and warm, which is what we got here. Pretty disappointing for something as important as the Civil Service Commission is. And I have to admit that I've had some real severe criticism of the Civil Service Commission over the years. And I suppose it's the price we pay for setting up a tribunal composed of lay people, people we think we like, people we trust, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a perfect system, but we find that it is essential. And our Civil Service Commission, there's an old case, Laudermilk versus Cleveland Board of Education, that holds that public employees are entitled to a hearing on the merits, somewhat like the one that we have. So we got to do it. We have to be very careful, I think, how we choose the people on the Civil Service Commission. And parenthetically, I would add that Ray's dad was on the Civil Service Commission once upon a time. I'd have to say those are probably the good old days of the Civil Service Commission. So we're, 5 minutes away from the end of the show? I got an urgent bulletin here. Well, actually, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't announce this. This is from the most dangerous man in the room. He says his car's at the shop, so he's enjoying the discussion online, which might be an encouragement to all kinds of malefactors to say the most dangerous man in the room is not around. Okay, so over the weekend here, you know, Jose and I are going to be pining away for Tall Tales, but as I mentioned before, if you were to take a look at Pacific Island Times on page 6, yeah, this is what you would find. And you might be able to, you know, sit around with a hot cup of coffee or a cold beer as you're saying, gosh, I miss Tall Tales. And perhaps this would be, it's not going to be a substitute for Tall Tales, that's for sure. But it is at least better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. The article begins like this. Robert Bob Klitzkie considers himself a recovering lawyer and a serial has-been. He's been a Marine, teacher, union officer, lawyer, director of education, director of corrections, senator, and judge pro tempore, to name a few. In the latest phase of his self-reinvention, Klitzkie now hosts the thought-provoking talk show Tall Tales on 93.3 FM. Well, I hope it's thought-provoking. That's one of the objects here. This is not a feel-good talk show. This is the kind of talk show that after it's over, I'm hoping one of the following reactions occurs. Wow, I didn't know that. I'm glad I listened. Or, you know, Bob's right on the money. I agree with him 100%. Or, you know, that Bob doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just wrong as hell on this one. Or, I'm going to call Bob and argue with him because I don't agree with him. You know, it's not, it is, Tall Tales is supposed to be, as the editorial here says, the article says, a thought-provoking talk show. And the article goes on to say the former senator, Republican who served 2 terms, is never afraid of going against the tide. Tide? As a talk show host, Klitzkie is never coy about expressing conservative opinions that may run counter to popular views. Like, the biggest problem we have on this island is the insular cases. If only the Supreme Court would reverse the insular cases, no more rhinoceros beetles, no more typhoons, no more deficits.
We get the RISE Act.
We get the RISE Act right away. So anyhow, I just offer that. I know it's not a substitute for the show, but you might find some enjoyment in it. And that's all I got to say for this week. We'll see you on Monday.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The White House fact-checking Americans. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The Biden administration admits to monitoring social media for posts about COVID-19, which it considers to be harmful. Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
We've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook.
Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley tells Fox News the social media companies ought to not be cooperating.
They're acting like arms of the government, and when they're monopolies, that's a big problem.
Los Angeles County has ordered residents to put their face masks back on while indoors starting this weekend. The order applies even to the fully vaccinated. LA County has reported 1,000 new cases of the Delta variant of the virus every day for the last week, but none of the people hospitalized for it had been vaccinated. Schools in Ohio blocked from requiring students to be vaccinated before returning to the classroom. Governor Mike DeWine signing the bill that says a mandate cannot be applied to any vaccine that is not fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The coronavirus vaccines are all currently classified as investigational and have only emergency use authorization. A standoff between police and a suspected cop killer has ended in Lubbock County, Texas. A sheriff's department robot locating the suspect inside a mobile home, and then Sheriff Kelly Rose says,
"We deployed additional gas, chemical agents into it, and that prompted him to move to one of the exterior portions of the house."
The 22-year-old suspect is wounded, probably in the earlier exchange of gunfire with police officers that left Sergeant Josh Bartlett, the commander of the county's SWAT team, dead and 4 other officers wounded. One of them reported to be critical but stable following surgery for a bullet wound. America is listening to Fox News.